morning, friends. God is good all the time. Today I'm going to show you how I like to dehydrate my garden tomatoes and some suggestions on how you can use them. So let's get started. Here is my harvest today of tomatoes from the garden. These are mostly Romas. I like a good paste type tomato for both dehydrating and making my sauces and salsas from. And I'll be chopping these up. I'm just going to mostly just dice them up and then putting them on the food dehydrator on the trays. So what you need obviously is your tomatoes. You'll need some sort of oil for your trays, a food saver or some other type of vacuum sealer that will work with jars, and then a glass jar, canning jar to put them in. So I'm going to go ahead and get these diced up, or at least some of them. And again, I'm not going to show you that process because everybody should know how to dice up tomatoes. This is just about dehydrating. So I'm going to do that instead of wasting video time. And then I'll come back and show you how I put them on the trays. Now that I got a good part of my tomatoes diced up, this is what I like to do next, because I found it's the best method when you're dehydrating on your electric type food dehydrator, anything that has a tray like this. I use the clean screen. This is a Nesco I was going to say Harvest, right? I mean American Harvest, sorry. I like this one in the fact that you can have up to 12 trays dehydrating at a time of whatever. And if I'm doing lots and lots of herbs and things that dry quickly, then I will do 12 trays. Typically, because I'm dehydrating something every single day, I'm usually doing 4 to 6 trays at a time anyway. But there are those days that I need more trays. And that's why I like this particular one. I know a lot of people swear by the Excalibur, and that's great. I've never had one, never used it, but I'm sure it's great. But this is the one that works for me. I got a good deal on it in the first place at an auction, and I'm happy with it. All right, so for your oil, since you're dehydrating, it's not going to be at a high heat, you're safe to use olive oil on this. And I prefer the olive oil for the tomatoes because, you know, it just adds that nice extra Italian flavor, which of course, being Italian, I'm going to like that. But you can also use hemp seed oil, you can use avocado oil, coconut oil, though you may want to use the deodorized, you know, somewhat processed, you know, coconut oil if you don't want that flavor in there. But it is really a good idea when you're doing the tomatoes to get some sort of oil in there. It makes it way easier to get the tomato stuff. And I know I started to say it earlier, and I tend to rabbit trail, but this little doohickey here is called a clean screen, and it was supposed to be mostly for doing herbs, small things. I use these all the time once I realized how great they were, because it makes it so much easier for removing whatever it is you're dehydrating from this. Usually I just kind of scrape the stuff off like the tomatoes. When you can get to a certain point, you can just pick it up like this. And this is much easier to clean than this part here. So I recommend, if you're going to get this type of food dehydrator, make sure you get enough of these to go with it. I have one of these for all 12 of my trays. Alright, so then I take my tomatoes and I just spread them out. You can see I'm not the kind of person that is highly meticulous about how I put these kind of things on here. Just like if you watched my fermenting pickle thing yesterday that just went up today, you'll notice I just sort of just throw things in a jar. I have too much to do to worry about having everything perfect, but you do want these spread out pretty good. And it looks like I may only end up getting 2 trays instead of 3 today, and that's fine. It's nice when I get 3 trays because I know that 3 trays will fill up a pint-sized jar just right, and then I can seal it. Alright, so there's my first tray. I still have more tomatoes to cut up. And I will go ahead and get to that and get that done and then take you on to the next step. My tomatoes are all diced up, and I decided, even though I already showed me putting on the one tray, I'm going to do this other one so I can explain to you why I'm doing this. What I like to do with my dehydrated tomatoes. Well, first of all, they actually, I don't know if it's just because it's garden tomatoes or what, but they taste so good as is. The dehydrated tomatoes in the olive oil, I could just eat them right from the jar. I love them. But they go great in throwing into any kind of sauces. Last night I made chicken fettuccine, and I threw in some of my dehydrated tomatoes from last year. And I love it in that kind of thing. Into soups, casseroles, omelets. Just make sure if you're going to use it in an omelet, you mix up your egg with a little bit of milk, and then whatever dehydrated vegetables you're going to put in your omelet, you want to put in there once the milk is mixed in with the eggs, and then let it sit for a bit. I like to use dehydrated onions and garlic in that as well, and sometimes a few other things, a lot of herbs that I dehydrate from my garden. So that's going to soak up some of that milk. That's why you really got to put the milk in there. Some people say water's better. You know what? I just realized I forgot to put the oil on there. That's irritating. This is why I shouldn't talk while I do this stuff. So I'm going to do this and move these over here. Yeah, so you want that. I've heard people say water is better, makes eggs fluffier, whatever. I like milk and some kind of liquid in there, and it gets, the dried whatever's, jalapenos, that's another one, dried thing I like to use. I dehydrated last year a whole bunch of jalapenos, a whole box of them, like 20 pounds I think it was, and still working on those. I love them. Throw them in you scramble up your eggs and with the milk, throw all your dehydrated vegetables and let them sit in there while you're cooking your beef bacon, which is what we like. We prefer the beef bacon. It is good. It is healthy. We get the Painted Hills brand. They don't use any nitrites or nitrates or hormones in their meat or antibiotics. It's just a great, if you have that in your area, I highly recommend the Painted Hills beef bacon. So much better for you all the way around. Anyway, so there's that. I ended up with 2.5 trays. That might fill up a pint-sized jar. So let me rinse my hands off, and then I'm going to show you what I do with these once they're dry. Well, I was going to show you what I do next, but then I realized with all this space, I wanted to use it up with something I don't mind putting in oil. So I took out one of my zucchinis and cut it up, stuck it on there. And another one of my favorite things is dehydrated zucchini. It's so good, it's like chips. And I sprinkle just a little of my homemade seasoning salt. But you want to do just, if you do this, very, very little, because when this is dehydrated, if you put on as much as you'd think for it as it is fresh, so all that water's out, you gotta think it's a much smaller piece of vegetable and it'll get too salty. I always seem to oversalt, and so I'm being conscientious of it this time. So I did spread a little olive oil onto the bottom of the tray, and then I'm just spreading a little bit extra on top to give it a little bit more crispiness. And then these are kind of thick pieces, but I'm alright with that. If I really want them really crispy, then I'll slice them real thin, but mostly I'm kind of pressed for time. Need to get these on there. Let's see, I think I can squeeze this last little piece on here. Just a tiny bit of salt. And maybe someday I'll make a video on how I make my homemade seasoning salt when I need to make up a new big batch. I always make a quart-sized jar at a time, and I fill that smaller little jar. By the way, my husband drilled these holes in there so I could have this, because these lids just look cool. And I like this better. And so he drilled the holes in there for me so we could use this as the seasoning salt shaker. Alright, so then what I do, once my, got a bit of a mess here. Once my tomatoes are all dehydrated, this is the last jar I did, tomatoes 2016. I did them a couple days ago. Then what I do is, if you have a food saver, you can get an attachment. Typically you're going to have to purchase it separately that looks like this. Your food saver will come with the hose, but you'll need to purchase this separately. There's one for a wide mouth and one for a regular mouth jar. And I'm not going to run this, I don't even have it plugged in. But you just put your lid on, make sure your rim is clean and dry. As you can see, I can pick this up by the lid and it's not coming off. And then you plug this into your accessory port, wherever that is. Press this down firmly, make sure this is also firmly in place. You lock it down, and then you'll press vacuum, or I don't even know what this is supposed to say anymore. It's all wore off. I've had this for a while. And what it will do is it'll vacuum all of the air out of your jar. And then this one's so old it doesn't shut off when it's done, so I have to guess. But typically when it's done, it'll vacuuming all the air out. It'll shut off and you'll know. And then you just do this. You pull this off. And whenever I'm dehydrating anything, I always like to make sure I put the bands back on, just in case. A lot of people talk about keeping the bands off once you've canned something. For dehydrating, I always put these back on. Because it's not going to be such a huge deal if I do lose a seal on a dehydrated item. As long as the lid's on nice and tight, if I lose a seal, the stuff inside is still going to stay good. If I lose the seal on a dehydrated item and I don't find it until later, then the stuff inside is not going to be, it can mold, it's not going to be as good. Whereas if this is on tight, it doesn't matter. These will stay nice and crispy in here. And you can hear, I don't want to open it up and reseal it again, but you can hear they're nice and dehydrated real well. Very good. I highly recommend you try this if you've never tried dehydrating your own tomatoes. Now, another thing I wanted to share with you is, I'll do more videos on this later, is that in the summertime, spring through summer, I'm running my electric dehydrator every day almost every single day. On the cooler days in the spring, I'm running this in the house, and it's plugged into a solar outlet that runs off our panels. You'll see those panels, even though I didn't mention them because I didn't think about it. You'll see them in the video I just put up on Homestead Happenings Part 1. And I'm doing a little overview of just a part of my gardening area, but the bigger portion of my gardening area. And as I'm panning, you'll see my solar panels. So anyway, even though this is electric, I run it entirely off of solar power through spring and summer. Then in the winter, I still do dehydrating, not quite as much, but in the wintertime, my husband built me this really cool dehydrating rack out of bed rails that he cleaned up and painted, and then some trays, some stainless steel trays that I got to fit on there. He made this to fit those particular trays, and I like it sits right on top of my wood stove, fits on there just perfect. And I dehydrate. Typically what I'm going to do on there is jerky, and I'm going to have to be doing that pretty soon. So I'll do beef jerky on there, and I prefer doing it on the wood stove because it's hotter, so it's cooking the meat as it's drying it, and I know it's going to be well preserved. And then I do the same method. I put the jerky into the jar and I vacuum seal it, and it's good. I've opened some that were 2 years old and it was delicious. Nothing wrong with it. So a really good way to preserve meat, and using no electricity to do it. So there's that, and I'm trying to remember if there was something else I was going to say. I'll probably remember it after I'm all done with this video. But anyway, I might show you later where I set this up. I was going to say, I set my dehydrator up in the summer when on hot days out in my greenhouse, because it's already hot in there anyway, and I don't care if it's hot in there, and we have a solar outlet in there. And that way I don't have it in here heating up the house, making it even hotter. So there you have it. So dehydrated tomatoes, and I'll have dehydrated zucchini slices too, and these will just be for snacking on. So that's it. So happy dehydrating. Have a good time with it. Play with it. Play with your tomatoes. See what you can do with them. There's a zillion ways you can use them. And thanks for watching.